Hey everybody, this is Mr. Maupin coming at you again. This is AP Government Topic 2.8 video. Continuing to take a look at the Judiciary Branch. Last time we were taking a look at some of the critical players that are in a typical court case, be it the litigants, the lawyers, etc., etc. A couple other items that we didn't quite get to, focusing in on that, includes the idea of plea bargains. A plea bargain is basically a way to address a very real issue in our judiciary system, and that's not just at the federal level, but at every state and local level. The fact is that we have way more cases that have to be adjudicated than courts and judges to be able to do them in a timely manner. As a result of that, we use plea bargains very, very commonly. In fact, about 90% of cases are actually the result of a plea bargain deal. So how does this work? Well, a plea bargain is where the prosecution, where they believe that it might be a little bit challenging to get a conviction, and the accused, who is a little bit nervous of being found guilty of the charge, agree on a deal to have the person that's been accused of the crime to accept a guilty plea in exchange for a lesser charge. So, for example, let's say that it's a situation where, somebody's been accused of second-degree murder, which is, somebody, in the heat of the moment intentionally trying to kill someone, or in the heat of the moment actually kill someone. But it might be a difficult thing for the state to be able to prove that, and the accused is nervous of what a second-degree murder conviction would mean. It might mean, 50 years in prison. They might agree to a manslaughter charge as a plea deal, and that person would admit guilt. And a manslaughter charge, especially if you're talking about first offense, is probably going to be less than 15 years. So that's an example of that. Now, that's used all over the place. So plea bargains are used as a way to reduce time and money that the state has to use to adjudicate cases, and it actually helps in the number of convictions that the prosecution is able to get. Lastly, keep in mind that interest groups also play a role in our judicial system. Interest groups can serve as the basis for litigation. For example, the NAACP in 1954 is going to be the driving force behind the series of lawsuits that will be the Brown versus Board of Education case, fighting for integrated public schools. So keep in mind that if you're in a situation where you feel as though you're an individual trying to fight the system, interest groups exist one of their jobs is to use litigation, the legal system, courts, to fight for the interests of their members. Okay? Well, then to kind of round out this section, we're going to be taking a look at one of the required court cases that you have to know for the big test in May, and that is Marbury versus Madison. Now, if you are an APUSH veteran, I'm sure you are familiar with this case, but for everybody, we do need to make sure that we understand the background information, what the constitutional issue is, who wins, why, and of course the lasting effect. So let's set the stage here. Let's provide a little context for this issue that is, this case took place over 200 years ago. Back in the end period of the Adams administration, we're talking about late 1800, early 1801, John Adams knows that he has already lost his re-election bid. Thomas Jefferson, a member of the opposing party, is going to be coming in to take over the White House. Congress had created recently a number of new judiciary positions for the federal system. And of course, as we know, whenever there's a federal judiciary vacancy, the President of the United States has to fill that. So Adams is finding himself in a situation where in the last remaining weeks of his presidency, he has to fill all these vacancies in the judiciary with appointments. Now, one of these individuals was a man by the name of William Marbury, and that's him over here on the left. William Marbury was appointed by Adams to be a judge in the D.C. court. Now, funny thing happens along the way. These appointments have to go through paperwork, and there has to be a process of how this actually works. Well, in the case of Marbury, Adams's term in office ends before the paperwork is actually processed. So when Adams leaves and Jefferson's inaugurated, the new Secretary of State, James Madison, and yes, it is the same James Madison you see over here to the right, that is the fourth President of the United States, or will be the fourth President of the United States, and also known as the Father of the Constitution. Back in those days, the Secretary of State had some additional responsibilities besides foreign relations, and involved in this case processing paperwork for presidential appointments. When Madison comes in and sees the paperwork left by Adams, he basically decides to, throw the appointments in the garbage, for lack of a better term. He ignores them and decides to have the president appoint different people to fill those vacancies. So in other words, Marbury's kind of left out in the cold because, well, it wasn't processed in time. Well, Marbury doesn't accept that. Marbury believes that he was legally appointed by the man that was the President of the United States at the time, John Adams, and that for purely partisan reasons, the new Jefferson administration is refusing to process his appointment that he feels that he is owed. And so to try to make this happen, he goes to the Supreme Court and petitions the court to issue what's known as a Writ of Mandamus. A Writ of Mandamus is a power of the court to basically force something to be done, to basically order the executive branch to do something. Now, this power was bestowed to the court via the Judiciary Act of 1789, one of the first laws for the federal government under the Constitution. So the power exists under law. Marbury tells the court, hey, you've got this power. I need you to use this power to force Madison to process my paperwork to allow me to become a D.C. court judge. Well, this then leads to the case itself of Marbury versus Madison. Now, in this case, this is where the impact of John Marshall is first truly felt in a big way. Marshall has to look at the situation and see whether or not, Marbury is due his position. And in fact, Marshall does believe deep down that Marbury is entitled to that position, but he has to tell Marbury some bad news. He has to tell Marbury that he, as the court itself, and he as the Chief Justice leading the court, cannot issue a writ of mandamus. Can't do it. Not because they, dislike Marbury or anything like that. In fact, Marshall was a Federalist like Marbury and despised Jefferson, his own cousin, a Democratic Republican. But the reason he tells Marbury this is because to issue a writ of mandamus, to basically use enforcement type powers, that he believes would be a violation of separation of powers, that enforcement is something that is totally independent of the judiciary, and that the courts do not have a constitutional power to force the enforcement of something. So, it might look in the very short term that, by kind of deciding that it doesn't have that writ of mandamus power, one might look at it very simply and think that, oh, well, the court just kind of cut off one of its appendages to be able to have any kind of power under the Constitution. And it certainly didn't make Marbury very happy, because he's being told that, there's nothing the court can really do to help him. But in this process of surrendering the writ of mandamus power, Marshall and the court asserts something even greater, and that is the power of judicial review. When the court says that it cannot have that writ of mandamus power, it is at that same time using judicial review power to do that. And even though, yes, Hamilton had implied in Federalist 78 that the court had this kind of power, it was not utilized. It was not explicitly utilized until this case. So, thinking forward, Marbury versus Madison is going to be very important, because without this ruling, without the impact and the influence of Chief Justice John Marshall, the court would simply just exist to be able to kind of interpret laws, or be able to answer questions of, is the law being properly applied? But with this now, it can actually serve as a real check on the other two branches of government, being able to find a law passed by Congress or an action taken by the executive branch to possibly be unconstitutional and therefore null and void. So, anyhow, be familiar with the case Marbury versus Madison. It's a really big one. Make sure you're using that graphic organizer to help you with this required case and all the other required Supreme Court cases. Okay? And with that, we will leave it there for the topic 2.8, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.